And let's go ahead and move on. So we don't need to worry about opacity. Let's go on to specular. So here's our spec map. I'm going to go ahead and plug that in and enable specular map. Now all of a sudden the shine has gone down because not everything is shiny. Pretty much only the metal is still shiny. The skin and the clothes a lot less shiny than they were before, and more appropriate that way. Also keep in mind that you control the sharpness versus blurriness of your specular highlights via the specular power. So if you turn the camera and look at this this buckle in his hat, you'll see that with the specular power down at 20, it's a very spread out, very blurred reflection of the light source. So there's a light source up here representing the moonlight that's hitting and bouncing off of the surface. And notice how as I turn up the value of the specular power, that it causes that highlight to become smaller. As you can see, if I slide it all the way to 0, that specular highlight fills pretty much the entire object, and as I drag that specular power to higher values, it really tightens it up. For certain things that you want to be very shiny or wet looking, you actually could go even higher than what looks like the limit for this slider. In fact, you can just type in whatever number you want into here. I've actually gone into values as high as several thousand if I want a very, very small highlight to represent a surface that is very wet or that is very highly polished. So if this is still not polished or wet looking enough as far as the type of specular highlight you're going for, you can always crank the value up even higher. Sometimes what you might need to do if you're cranking the value up to several hundreds or even into the thousands is to also increase the specular color value. So the way to do that is to just click on this color swatch for specular color, and here be sure down in the lower right you have the system set to HSV, because that way you can just adjust the value. Okay, so sometimes it goes away, you can just click on it again, and I'm going to, in the V, I'm going to type in a value of let's try 3. Okay, as you can see now it's a smaller highlight, but it's also brighter. And that's consistent with what you see in nature, and that is, as the highlight becomes smaller and more focused, its intensity should also be higher. So if you want very shiny looking surfaces, then you want to have a high specular power value, and you also want to kind of artificially increase the specular intensity by going into its color and setting its value to a higher number. Next, let's plug in the normal map, which will give us all of the nice bumpy detail. So the normal map is right here, and I'm going to connect it into normal map and turn it on. Okay. And as you can see, everything now looks bumpy. Now let's set up the reflection map, and remember the reflection map is tied into the specularity, so we need to make sure that certain things are set up so that the reflection is in sync with the specularity. So first thing we want to do is let's go ahead and let's go and drag the texture in. So the same image that you use for the IBL is going to be used for the reflection, and it's going to be a 2D. We never use cube. So reflection 2D map, reflection type 2D lat long, and of course remember to enable check on reflection map. And right away you see that everything looks very shiny. Okay, a lot shinier than they ought to be, so we need something to control the shininess so that it is in sync with the shininess represented by our spec map. So the way we do that is we're going to use the exact same texture that we use for spec map and connect that into reflection mask, and of course check it on. And another thing that's useful, especially for these gold or brass buttons or anything that's metallic, is to check on spec color to tint reflection. Right now the buttons are looking kind of dull, or maybe I should say maybe they look too polished. So one of the things we can do is, one of the settings we changed earlier was the specular power. So we might want to consider bringing that down a bit, because ultimately these buttons are meant to be a bit more worn, so therefore their specular highlight is going to be a little bit broader. So it's a trade-off. Obviously if the specular power is too low, as you can see, it just does not look realistic. And of course if we had it as high as where we had it, about 500, that does not look realistic either. So ultimately, and same goes for all these settings, is just adjust it to what you feel is right and what best matches the reference images you're using. As always, I mean, part of the skill of becoming a texture artist, or a little more specifically with what we're doing, a look development artist, is adjusting the material attributes until it most closely looks like its real world counterpart. So in our case, I have my specular power now all the way back down to single digits or so. I think around somewhere between maybe 8 to 12. Let's try 10, just so I'm using a nice round number. 10 looks pretty good. I think I'll go with 10 for the specular power. And now that looks the right amount of shininess for the type of buttons we're going for. Okay, now that that's working for us, let's go back and we can more clearly see the contribution that this checkbox, specular color to tint reflection, has. We might need to increase reflection intensity before we can really see the effect. So I'm going to go ahead and, because I have all these things masking off the reflection appropriately, I can set the reflection intensity all the way to 1. So type in 1, hit enter. And now, if I uncheck spec color to tint reflection, that makes a dramatic difference. Not only to the metallic parts, but also to the parts that aren't meant to be that reflective. It really tones those down. And also in the metallic areas, the reflection is tinted the color of the metal, which is what you will find is true in the real world. Again, the thing that makes metallic surfaces look the way they do is the fact that how light reflecting off of metallic objects are tinted their color.